right, so we are finished with our application packet and we're on to Unit 2, Usability Testing and Web Redesign Proposal. So I mentioned in the introduction lecture that this course is really about user-centered design. And so this is the unit that really zeroes in on usability. Obviously, it's about usability testing. This unit also is the largest and worth the most of all the other projects. So this one takes a little bit more time. It's got 3 components to it, so it's broken down into 3 kind of sub-assignments, and I would highly recommend on this one to work in groups if possible. You can either group up with people that you know that are already taking the class with you, or you can just email me and say, I'd like to work in a group, and I'll put you into groups. It's really important to email me soon and to get your groups figured out soon, though, because you're going to have to pick a crappy website pretty soon in the project to start even the very first assignment. So strongly recommend doing group on this. You should have the time. We have 5 weeks to cover this to really get into contact with your groups and figure it out, and it will really help spread out both the kind of major assignment requirements and also the peer reviews that you'll be doing, because peer review, again, is really important to this class. And if you're working in groups, you can kind of assign peer reviews to different group members to lighten the workload just a little bit. So there's that, but let's get into what exactly you're going to be doing. So this is all about usability testing for website redesign. So let's talk about the context first. So the context is this. Imagine you work for a company that specializes in website usability. Your boss has tasked you with finding a local website that is flawed. So the website owner is your prospective client. After you have found a local website, you will send the prospective client a proposal to do a usability test for redesign. Next, you will plan the testing session and send the protocol memo to the client. Finally, you will conduct a usability test to find out the biggest flaws and propose changes based on real user needs. The testing provides more information for your company as they redesign the site, and it also provides the potential client with evidence of the current website's flaws. Most importantly, it uses real users' responses to websites to figure out what is working and what is not. So that's the context for the assignment. I want to clarify really quickly, because we didn't really have context for the first, other than it responding to a job call. But I'm going to, at the beginning of the unit, give you the context that you're writing within. So the imagined scenario that you're responding to, because it's really important when we're writing that we are kind of engaging and responding to a specific context. But then I'll give you, as I do right here, right, tasks in a nutshell, I'll kind of give you a succinct kind of explanation of what you're doing. But I always want you to pay attention to the context, because that's important. It helps you better understand why you're doing what you're doing and to help you kind of respond appropriately. Again, as I mentioned in the intro, always use, so you can get like a quick breakdown or checklist, go to the rubrics, read the context, understand the context, hang with me through the lectures so you really get what we're doing and can go into depth with me. But when you need to kind of sit down and have a checklist, that's what the rubric at the end of the assignments are for. They're going to tell you exactly in succinct kind of bulleted points, you need this, you need this, you need this. So these are ways to effectively read the assignment sheets. Understand the context first, but then when you're going into, if you're someone who likes bullet points, use those rubrics. But now let's go on and look at kind of this overall assignment in a nutshell. So it's a 3-part assignment. And here are the 3 parts. Assignment 2.1 is the usability test proposal. So you're going to propose a usability test to the website's owner. That's your main goal. I'll explain each of these in more depth in different lectures. Assignment 2.2 is the protocol memo. You're going to write a protocol memo explaining to the client exactly what you're going to do during the usability test to test the website. This is going to show them that the test is legit, what you're doing, and why you're doing it. Assignment 2.3 is the actual usability report. This is where you're going to write a report explaining what the usability test showed you and proposed changes based on those test results. So in a nutshell, those are the kind of succinct explanations of each of the assignments. But now let's go into your first assignment 2.1 into a little bit more depth. Before I do that though, I want to talk really quickly about usability. So now a reminder, you need to be sure that you've purchased Steve Krug's Rocket Surgery Made Easy. You're going to use this throughout this entire unit. You are welcome, if you're working in groups, have one group member buy it and share it, but you need this book. So what does Steve Krug say usability testing is? In the book that you're about to read, Krug says basically it's watching people try to use what you're creating, designing, building, or something you've already created, designed, and built with the intention of A, making it easier for people to use, or B, proving that it is easy to use. So usability testing is pretty straightforward, right? It's getting real users and watching them to see if the thing is user-centered or how it can be made more user-centered. So what I want you to think about this, because you're going to be conducting your own usability test, is you need to think about the participant or the testing subject that you choose. They need to represent a real user, the real demographic, someone who the website is actually kind of targeted for. So that's what's key to the most successful usability test, is that you get someone who really would be using it, real users, right? So if you're an engineer, a design engineer, and you've designed something, you don't ask another design engineer who has more knowledge on the entire product to use it, to see how user-centered it is, because that's not going to give you accurate information. You pick someone who's unfamiliar with it, but who you want to be able to use it and use it well. This is who you need to choose to do your actual testing. In this assignment, at any other time you do a usability test, don't get someone who's already familiar with it. Get someone who represents the real user and who is a layperson that will really demonstrate to you how user-centered a product or website is. All right, so now let's get into depth with assignment 2.1. So this is the first part of your 3-part assignment, and this is where you're going to propose a usability test to redesign a website. So think of this as a usability test proposal, but we have to break that down, right? There's going to be several components to this one assignment, because before you propose it, you have to do a lot of setup to persuade the client that this is going to be worthwhile. So here's what you need to do. So first of all, before you even start your brainstorming, your writing, your drafting, you've got to choose that small scale website, preferably a local business or an academic department. You will find a lot of not user-centered websites in this kind of smaller local business or academic department area. But pick one that you see just from looking at it that has several flaws which you can improve upon. So that's your first step, is you got to pick that crappy website. So now, what does the actual document need to have? Let's get into that. So your introduction needs to basically start out with users and purposes. You need to identify what the primary goals of the website are and who you think the target audience is for the site. So key to this is, think of this introduction part as saying, hey, I know what your website's about. Here is what your website needs to do. Here is what the goals of it are for you. And here are the people that you're reaching for. So it's really important to do this because you're demonstrating to your client, I know what you're trying to do with your website and I know who your target audience is. You're demonstrating you've done your research and you understand what the website needs to do and who they're reaching out to. Specifically, you must identify 3 main purposes of the website, 2 of which you're going to test, and you need to write that user persona for a typical user of the site. Again, when you get down to usability testing, the person that you choose to actually do the test needs to fit that user persona that you've written for this. So here are some tips for this part. As you discuss the uses and purposes, consider the user and site organization as you describe these, or the site or organization as you describe these. So you need to really think about, like, what are the purposes? Like, what does the website need to do? So say you choose an academic website. So I'm going to use, I think Yale has a terrible art website, because I've had several students every semester, or I've had a student every semester choose this, I feel like. So it must pop up. And you're welcome to use it if you want. But I'm going to use that as an example. Whenever you're talking about the Yale art website, you're going to talk about, like, what the purpose is. Students need to, be able to see what scholarships are available, be able to see what requirements are, be able to do this, right? You're going to map out what this site needs to do, and it's going to be in terms of the target audience. So be sure that you're doing that. So my second tip is be sure target user is clearly defined. So you also define those, right? You don't just say a person or a user. You use that specific definition of who we imagine the most common users are, because that helps us dictate or decide what is user-centered design. You have to have a specific audience in mind. So keep that in mind as you're kind of laying out and explaining to your client that, like, this is what your website, like, I see these are the main purposes. This is what the user needs to accomplish, and this is who the user is, because you're always going to speak back to that, right? It's all about making it user-centered, so we have to have a clear picture of who that user is. So here's an example introduction. So blushnorman.com is the online shop for a physical store located in Norman, Oklahoma. This page has three main purposes, which are to sell Blush's clothing and products, increase business in the physical store location by increasing interest through the online site, and create customer loyalty on online sales by creating a website design that is user-friendly. The website sells University of Oklahoma t-shirts and hats, Oklahoma City Thunder t-shirts, whitening toothpaste, and customer t-shirts. The site's main goal is to sell merchandise to make money. However, it could be doing that much more effectively than it is right now. With the typical user being a female college student, it is important that the store's website reflect that in order to attract new customers and to retain previous customers. The site should be user-friendly, and it should be customized to appeal directly to the target customer. This can be as easy as making it easily navigable and aesthetically pleasing with no unnecessary distractions floating around the page. So this isn't a flawless introduction. This is not a perfect introduction, but it is a solid introduction, and it does the main steps. So you see here, it's explaining, right? So remember, you're talking to the website owner. So you're demonstrating to them, I know what your company is. I know what your website's purpose is. So, like, I have that in mind. I know what you're trying to do. This is just demonstrating to them that you understand what the purpose is. And it also kind of reminds them, right? Like, your website needs to do this, and you can go on to show how it's not fulfilling some of those because of the website flaws. And then notice they zero in on the typical user. So it's not just some vague, faceless user. It's female college students, right? So you think about how you make this site user-friendly and appealing to that demographic. So this is a sample introduction that helps you think about how you kind of, and it's persuading, right? It's talking about money. It's talking about how this website could be better and do these things better. So this is really important, is whenever you're persuading someone to pay for something, you constantly want to kind of weave in how it's going to make them more money, how it's going to make their business more profitable, how it's going to attract more users, right? So these are things to think about as you're crafting these documents. All right, so let's look at the next parts of it. So we've gone through the introduction. We've said to our client, here's your website, here's what it needs to do, here are the people it's reaching out for. I think it can do this better. Now you're going to the next part. So Number 2 is a flaws analysis. So you need to identify the design flaws of the website. So you have to identify or analyze 3 pages, the home page and 2 secondary pages. Make sure you have all those. As you're doing this, you need to do it visually using screen captures and labels. You also need to describe these flaws in terms of your target users and their goals on the website. So this should reference the unit readings that we've been doing and the lectures, right? So as you're analyzing the pages, the home page and the 2 secondary pages, you're calling out, here's a problem, here's why it's a problem for the user. You're also talking about design flaws, and you're talking about, like you always want to talk about, how that's making the website ineffective. So that's your flaws analysis. And be sure you need to use screen captures to show them the flaws that you're talking about. So some tips on this section: be sure that you use clear images, and be sure to label and caption all images and refer to them in the body text. So for example, the page includes large blocks of text that make needed information difficult to find, as shown in figure 3. And then you have an image of figure 3, and under it, it says figure 3, and it describes quickly what the reader is looking at. And do not forget the audience. You are speaking to the website owner, so don't insult them. Don't talk about how stupid it is. Don't use extreme language that says, "and this ridiculous web page," because they may have built it. So you want to balance pointing out the flaws without insulting the website, because at the end of the day, you're talking to the person who okayed the website. Now let's look at what I mean by really utilizing images. This came from an actual student sample that I had in a previous semester, and it does a really good job at using an image and also using labels within the image to demonstrate what it's talking about. So there was a discussion about the flaws, and then they used arrows, they used red boxes to really point out what their proposal discusses. So it says the actual navigation bar is halfway down the page. So it's talking about design flaws, quick links, or it's showing the actual quick links that they're talking about. So within the images, they're also kind of highlighting the different areas that they have described within the proposal. So this is a really smart move to be sure that you're really utilizing images. So section 3 is a competitor analysis. So this is the main part of the assignment. You're going to find one other website that is of the same kind, purpose, or business, but is a better designed website. So you're going to describe how this works better or solves the problems your chosen website is having. So if students that do the Yale Art School page, when they're proposing redesign, they look at OU's Art School page to show a better example and to demonstrate how much more effective and user-centered the page is. So that is the third part, or the third section of this assignment. Again, you're going to use images and screenshots whenever you do this. Be sure that you label your images. Be sure that you label and capture your images. People always forget that, so be sure that you do that when you're using those. So you will reference it in your actual text, and then you will actually give it figure 1 and a quick caption. Every image you use, you need to do that. All right, so part 4 of this document is the actual proposal. So you've set it all up. You've said, here's what your website needs to do. Here are the people that it's reaching. Here are all the flaws that your website has that's making it not effective for the users. Hey, look, here's a better example of a website that is similar to yours, but it's more user-centered and it's doing a better job. Now, finally, you're going to move to your proposal. You're going to conclude by proposing that usability test to your client. Within this proposal, you're going to explain which 2 tasks or flaws you will specifically run the usability test for and why. Remember, your and why should always be connected to how it's going to benefit the company, why it's the most important, how it's going to affect profitability or the website the most. In this section, you also need to do a little bit of convincing on why a usability test will be beneficial to your client. Remember, they're going to have to pay for this, so you're going to have to persuade them that it is worthwhile. You need to describe a little bit more general information on the type of usability test you perform. In this section, you need to reference Krug. All right, so things to make sure that you are doing or have in assignment 2.1. It needs to be written to your client. It is not written to me. It is not written just within the context of a classroom. This is a proposal to an actual client who owns the crappy website. So that means it needs to have the name and contact information of the client. You need to think of including client-themed colors, logo, etc. You need to have a formal cover page and table of contents for the client. You need to not assume your client knows this assignment or the requirements, so you need to set it up as if you were actually sending this to the website owner. So give it headings, give all the information that it needs, and use language that is appropriate for speaking to the website owner. The intro needs to provide a nice summary to demonstrate, who the client is as a brand and what the goal of their website might be. Make sure your critiques are geared towards that brand identity and that they're not offending the client. So again, it comes down to critique, but do not insult. Build this entire document for scannability, but also depth. Not everything is in paragraphs and not everything is in bullets. So think about where you need to bullet things and where things need to be in, paragraph text form. Keep in mind, your client has no idea what a usability test is, nor do they know about good web design. So you have to teach them. That's part of your persuasion method in this, is you teach them what usability testing is, why it's so important, and what good design is. Don't just make up info, cite best practices and examples from our readings. And then each problem should show a possible solution from the competitor. So in the flaws analysis, each problem that you point out, you'll show them when you go on and do the competitor analysis, how that is effectively doing the thing that their website's not. Use a template for the overall proposal or mimic one. Check out student samples that I have for each one. That will help you see how other people have formatted these as well. And then be sure that images are clear, that they are labeled, that you use arrows pointing to key attributes, provide a caption, and refer to the figures in your body text as seen in figure 1, as seen in figure 2. Be sure that you're doing that. All right, and here's some troubleshooting for assignment 2. 1, be sure you read the assignment, entire assignment sheet, including the rubric that is provided at the end. Some common errors. Introduction. The intro does not thoroughly address each component required in depth. So remember, you need to explain both the website and the target audience, and you're speaking to the website owner. The audience or client isn't clearly identified. Remember, you need to be crafting this document to speak to the client, so be sure your tone is appropriate. And also be sure you're consistently referencing the actual target audience of the website. The user isn't kept in mind during all the analyses. Remember that the user is different than the client. So as you're doing the analysis, you don't just say, and don't just make general statements constantly. Sometimes it's okay to talk about general design flaws, but you also need to weave in at certain moments how it's specifically not helpful for the target audience, right? That it doesn't speak to the target audience, that it doesn't match the brand or what they're going for. The analyses sometimes don't include enough detail. Remember to get into depth about the design flaws, use images, explain not just that it's a problem, but why it's a problem. Images, I've already stressed this, they are not labeled or utilized. So be sure that they're all labeled with figure, and be sure that they are captioned, and be sure that they are utilized. Explain the images in depth. And then sometimes the proposal doesn't persuade the client to do the usability test. Be sure that you're persuading. You are trying to get them to spend money, so you're going to have to use some persuasive elements.